Today's discussion is for the 15th of Tishrei, otherwise known as the first day of the holiday of Sukkos. The first 2 days of Sukkos have all of the rules of Shabbos, with a few slight exceptions, so please listen to this recording either before Sukkos, the first 2 days, or after the first 2 days. We have so far went through all the laws of Rosh Hashanah, of Yom Kippur, of Sukkos, Lulav and Esrog. Yesterday was Hoshana Rabbah, Sheminat Atzeres, and Simchas Torah, and we're done with the laws of this time period. But we're still not going back to the regular cycle yet, starting from the beginning of Tishrei, because it still is a holiday over the next week, the holiday of Sukkos. We're going to spend the next week or so talking about laws of Yom Tif, of holidays. When Sheminat Atzeres, Simchas Torah is finished, then we're going to go to the beginning of the Tishrei and start from chapter 1. But today we are beginning chapter 98. Chapter 98 discusses the laws of Yom Tif, of holidays. Today we'll be doing paragraphs 1 through 7. Now, a few introductions to this chapter. First of all, a lot of this chapter is based on Shabbos. We're comparing things that we can't do on Shabbos. How could we? On Yom Tif, some things are more lenient. We'll discuss soon what. And so we're going to be referencing a lot of Shabbos rules. I'm going to try briefly explaining what it is, but it might be worthwhile once we get to the laws of Shabbos in a few months down the road to come back and re-listen to these next few days. I don't want the next few days to turn into classes about Shabbos. I want to stay Yom Tif holiday focused. So I'll mention what has to be mentioned, but not go too in depth into the background of the Shabbos prohibition, even though we will be referencing it. In addition, until now, I've been trying to do that balancing act of being true to what the Tishrei is talking about, but trying to make sure it's practical and relevant to the audience. There's a number of laws in this chapter which don't apply, or at least aren't so relevant to us in 2024. There might be rules which come out of the laws that are relevant, but what they were going to talk about, trapping animals, slaughtering animals, things of that nature, which nowadays you want chicken, you don't bring home a chicken and slaughter it. You go to the store and buy yourself chicken ready to go. So therefore, when we get to things like that, I'm going to do a bit more skipping of the actual words and cases of the Tishrei to make sure that this class is staying relevant and focused on how do you live a Jewish life instead of talking about things that aren't really so relevant for us anymore. Again, if there's a underlying rule that's relevant, then I'll make sure to mention those rules. And one final introduction. We're going to see that there are some leniencies that Yom Tif holidays have over Shabbos. There's 39 categories of creative work that we don't do on Shabbos. On Yom Tif, we're allowed to do a lot of things that are related to food preparation. Not everything could you do for food preparation, but a lot of things you could do. That's the general leniency. On Shabbos, food preparation is okay. But things which are still problematic even within food preparation, we're going to see there's 3 reasons why even something which should be okay is not going to be okay in regards to food preparation on a holiday. Reason number 1, something which is just as easy and just as tasty to do if you prepare it before the holiday should be done before the holiday. So we're going to see some things won't be allowed because there's no reason to do it on the holiday, do it early. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 why food preparation leniency might not happen. If it's something which is done in large quantities, something which is almost similar or potentially similar to a commercial food production instead of a residential food production, that also would cause us to say, you can't, even though that's for food preparation, you can't do that on the holiday. And the third thing is that something which might be related to food production, but still the halacha says you can't do it, might be because of something that's called tircha yasera. It just takes a lot of physical effort to get it done. And Shabbos and holidays are supposed to be days of relaxation. So even though preparing food is okay, if something takes a lot of physical effort, the halacha might say that you can't do it. So with those introductions, paragraph 1. The general rule is that any action which is prohibited on Shabbos is also prohibited on a holiday, on Yom Tif. Just like on Shabbos, we're not allowed to ask non-Jews, or there's a lot of rules which we'll get to down the road about how to ask non-Jews to do one of these prohibited actions on our behalf. So to Yom Tif, those rules also apply if we're going to ask a non-Jew to do one of these prohibited actions on our behalf, we have to know the right way to ask them, whether we're allowed to ask them, which types of things we could ask them, etc. The exception where the holidays are more lenient than Shabbos, as I mentioned in the introduction, is in regards to preparing food. Many of those prohibited actions are okay, either fully or in some way, if it's in order to prepare food for the holiday. Some examples that would include kneading dough, baking, slaughtering animals, cooking, all those things. We're going to get to details soon. Those would be allowed on the holiday if it's to prepare food for the holiday. If it's to not prepare food for the holiday, then it would not be allowed. Carrying from one domain to another, or within a public domain, a public area, both actions that are normally prohibited on Shabbos, as well as lighting fires, which also is prohibited on Shabbos. Those two things really, the carrying and the lighting the fire, is permitted on a holiday, even if it's not for food preparation, as long as it is for a Yom Tif, a holiday benefit, and something which everyone can relate to. Something to be aware of about fire that we're going to talk about down the road is that you can't start a fire in Yom Tif, but you could transfer one fire to a new fire. You could create a new fire using an old fire. You can't strike a match, but you could take a lit match or a lit candle and light another candle with that. What does it mean that's something that everyone can relate to? Great question. We'll discuss that down the road. Paragraph 2 discusses making cheese on Yom Tif. Since it's not common for people to make cheese nowadays, we're going to skip paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 discusses grinding spices. Since that's not so common nowadays, we're going to skip paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 talks about splitting wood or gathering wood for a fire. So if you have a fireplace, or you want to make a bonfire in Yom Tif to cook on, or for warmth, that would be okay. However, we're not allowed to split wood, split logs, and we're not allowed to gather up logs. Logs already have to be, you can't gather up a pile of logs. You could take a log and bring it to the fire, but you can't create a pile. The reason why you cannot do these two things, splitting the logs and gathering up the logs, is because it's just excessive work that you could get by without, and the physical labor that's unnecessary we refrain from. Like I mentioned in the introduction, it's supposed to be holidays are supposed to be days of relaxation, of contemplation, of connecting to God, to each other, not days of hard physical work. Paragraph 5. Anyone that's been to Boy Scouts or sleepaway camp knows that one of the ways that when you're making a bonfire, one of the ways is to build some sort of teepee out of the logs or some sort of box. Very often, you might have some stones down that you put the log across some stones to light it up. You have to make certain that you're not making any sort of roof. One of the Shabbos prohibitions is making a tent. A tent means you have two sides and then a roof on top of it. You just create a tent. So you have to make sure that you're not building any sort of structure out of the logs to start this fire that would include putting down a log on top of two stones or two other logs that would be creating any sort of roof. You could create like a box shape as long as the center of the box is uncovered. Paragraph 6 discusses if you have a fire using bellows to make the flame grow bigger. Again, that's not common nowadays. We will skip that. Paragraph 7 discusses the prohibition of borer. Borer is selecting. On Shabbos, if you have a pile of stuff and you want to separate it in different piles or pull something out of the pile, if you're just taking out one object, that's not a problem. But let's say the classic example is you have a lot of popcorn. Again, we'll discuss this more by Shabbos. But you have you have a pile of popcorn, a bowl of popcorn, and there's some kernels in there and there's some popcorn in there. And you want to take all the popcorn out and throw out the kernels. So on Shabbos, the rule is you have to do it with your hand. You can't use any sort of sifting instrument. You have to do it right before you're ready to eat it. You can't do it in advance, for an hour down the road preparing for guests to come that you're going to get all the popcorn ready. And on Shabbos, you have to take the good from the bad. You can't if you have an easy way of getting out the bad stuff, you can't just throw out the bad stuff. You have to take the good stuff. In the popcorn example, generally speaking, you take the good stuff anyways. But if it's a different example where you might want to take the bad stuff and throw that out, nope, you got to take the good stuff. Those three things, the good from the bad, with your hand for right away. On Shabbos, some of these conditions are relaxed. So it does not have to be for right away. You could do a selection or sorting stuff for later in the day, not a problem. you're able to either separate all the good or separate all the bad. And since you could do both in Yom Tif, you're supposed to do whichever one is easier, as opposed to on Shabbos, where you could only take the good from the bad. And in terms of using some sort of sorting instrument, if you're not supposed to use any sort of sieve, because sieves are meant for doing a large amounts. One in the introduction I mentioned, one of the things which might stop you from being able to do food preparation is if it looks like it's for a large amount, it might start looking like it's for a commercial need. And so a sieve you'd use for a large amount of stuff, you can't use a sieve. You can use a different type of instrument, but not a sieve. This concludes today's learning. Have a great day and see you tomorrow, or in this case, on the next recording.